Welcome, everyone. I'm going to give a moment for everyone to join in. Thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful for you sharing part of your day with us. We've got more people joining. So we'll just give it a moment as everyone gets ready and signed on. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to have you all here for this incredible webinar commemorating October 7th, creating space during the Chaggim, featuring our incredible panel of speakers and moderator. We are so thankful to all of our partners for their support in developing this and promoting this opportunity so that it could happen today. And this will be recorded so that those who aren't able to join us live will be able to join us virtually on their time after. So I'm going to get us started. I know there are still people joining. So as you join, welcome. I want to start by first just introducing the two organizations who have partnered together to help create this opportunity. So my name is Carly Coons. I am the Director of Education and Programming at the Blue Dove Foundation, as well as a licensed social worker. The Blue Dove Foundation is dedicated to mental health education, awareness, and outreach in the Jewish community, with our ultimate goal being to eliminate the stigma around mental illness and addiction. And I want to turn it over to Beth Lipschitz to introduce herself and be well.
Hello, welcome everybody. I am Beth Lipschitz. I am a social worker and the wellness educator for Be Well, which is the mental health and wellness initiative for youth and those who care about them, as part of the Jewish Federations of North America in partnership with the Network for Jewish Human Services.
Fantastic. So before we dive into today, we just wanted to share a little bit about the goals for this event. The holidays are upon us, and we know that this is always a challenging time of year, and this year has the additional layer of the anniversary of October 7th, as well as everything that we've experienced over this past year and are continuing to experience. We know that this affects us personally and professionally. So as we are planning for the high holidays and planning for commemorations, we just want to remind everyone how important it is to consider the mental health of ourselves, of individuals in our community, and what their different needs might be. So our goals for today, first and foremost, to validate that this is challenging, both personally and professionally. This will be challenging in ways that we can anticipate, but also in ways that we haven't anticipated yet. The second goal for today is to provide a space to think about how your organization and your community can prepare for the holidays and the year anniversary of October 7th. And our third goal is that we hope you leave feeling more prepared to have these conversations, thinking about what questions you need to ask, who do you want to talk with, and what resources might you need to approach the holidays and the commemoration of October 7th with well-being in mind. When this webinar is over, we will be sharing out the recording. We will also be sharing out a resource page that we've started to collect resources on, that if you have more resources, you'll be able to share with us and we will put them up on the page. We also have received so many incredible questions in the registration that we won't possibly have time to get to all of them today. So the Be Well team will be offering a couple of different sessions called Continued Conversations, an opportunity for you to brainstorm with peers and talk to each other to decide how you might approach some of the challenges you're anticipating, or the programs that you're hoping to plan. The last thing we want to remind you before I turn it over to our moderator, Mark Young, is to be present in the way that you need to today. Whatever that looks like is okay. So thank you for showing up in whatever way you need today. So it is my honor to turn it over to Mark Young, who is the Vice President of Strategy and the Director of J Response at the JCC Association of North America. Mark will be moderating our panel today. So Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Carly, thank you. Thank you to Beth. And thank you to all of you for being a part of today's conversation. I think it's worth mentioning that over 400 people registered for the session. So this is definitely a need that is hopefully being filled today that you're expressing. And JCC Association of North America and our J Response program has been really honored and humbled to have partnered with Be Well and with Blue Dove for several years. J Response, so I'm Vice President of Talent Strategy and Director of J Response at JCC Association. J Response is our movement's program and talent offering that trains JCC professionals to respond to crisis, both natural disasters and those that are not natural disasters. And I think it's important as we frame this conversation today of how we commemorate October 7th and how we create space during the Chaggim for ourselves and for those that we serve to talk about why we are here and what's the purpose of remembering, what's the purpose of Zahor. So with that, I'm actually going to share my screen before we start with the panel and introduce J Response a little bit more in that context. For the work that we do in the JCC movement, J Response is about four things. It's about readiness, it's about relief, it's about recovery, and it's about resilience. And we say there's a little bit of every R and every other R. So as we think about when we remember in general, when remembering the loss of a loved one, a yard site, or remembering a terrible disaster, or remembering something as unique and powerful and haunting as October 7th and everything since, the work that we're going to be doing today in preparation for that is about keeping ourselves ready to continue to serve this community, our local communities and the broader North American Jewish community and global Jewish community as we approach the Chaggim and the first year commemoration of 10/7. It's about giving those we serve in ourselves a little bit of relief and a little bit of also recovery. Though this trauma is ongoing, and Tikva will talk a little more about that, we are still recovering and will continue to need to recover from that initial event of 10/7 and giving us overall resilience. We know that this is a marathon never ending, not a sprint. So what are the tools and skills that we and our community need in order to approach the next several weeks and also beyond that? We say there's a little bit of every R and every other R. So I think we'll be doing all of these things beginning this afternoon or this morning. I also want to introduce a Jewish text as a way of framing our conversation from Deuteronomy 22, 1-4. Lo tira. Lo tira et shor achicha oz et shehin nidachim v'hit alamamti mehem hashev teshivim la'achicha. In English, if you see your fellow's ox or sheep gone astray, do not ignore it. You must take it back to your fellow. A little more in English. If your fellow does not live near you or you do not know who they are, you shall bring it home and it shall remain with you until your fellow claims it. Then you shall give it back to them. You shall do the same with their donkey. You shall do the same with their garment. And so too shall you do anything with your fellow loses and you find, and perhaps this is the most important part, you must not remain indifferent. It's been 300 days since October 7th. And life has continued and not continued for those that have been affected by it, which is all of us, directly and indirectly. We are committing ourselves by being on this webinar today to making sure that we must not remain indifferent to what happened on October 7th and since. And what do we need to do in order to make sure that we're keeping ourselves strong personally and serving our communities in any way that we're serving Jewish life. So it's a real pleasure to be able to moderate this conversation and to bring in three wonderful colleagues: Tikva Womack of Baltimore Jewish Community Services, Noam Dahari of BBYO, who's coming to us from Israel, and Rabbi Dina Schaefer of Jewish Federations of North America. I'm going to ask each of you the same question while you introduce yourselves. And Tikva, why don't we start with you? Say a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why do you think we're here today?
All right, good afternoon or good morning, depending on who's watching this. Thank you so much for having me here today, Mark, and Blue Dove and Be Well. Appreciate the opportunity. I am out of Jewish Community Services in Baltimore, Maryland, and my master's is in expressive arts therapy with a specialization in clinical mental health counseling, and I specialize in trauma and cultural humility. I was thinking about your framing, Mark, in terms of Zahor, right? Like the remembering, and the way it was once given over to me is like there's remembering and there's remembering, like actually going through the activity of living through it. And that's like such a deep part of our tradition, a part of the Jewish tradition, right? Like we have Pesach and the Seder, and and just as we go through the Torah cycle, but there's also this concept within trauma, right? Of like, if anyone's ever heard of like the body keeping the score. I was just talking to a client about that this morning, that we don't just conceptualize remember, but our bodies remember. And I think there is a process that's inherently built in our tradition around taking our bodies and going through the exercise of what it means to relive and re-experience something that can add another layer of meaning each time that we do it. And so when I think of commemorating, I think of where am I at this point in time. I frequently relate to the spiral of trauma, that we might have one traumatic event, but we go through the cycle and the spiral, and we're at a different point at it as we journey through it at any different time in our lives. Hope I answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Tikva, thank you for introducing yourself and thinking also about that spiral. Noam, please introduce yourself. Tell us where you're coming from right now, where you're beaming in from, and why do you think we're here today?
Thanks, Mark, and good to see everyone. Thank you for being here. I am joining from the beautiful and as of now quiet but very tense north of Israel. My small one of our BBYO summer trips are that's called BBYO Journey, and it might seem confusing because I'm Israeli. I'm currently in Israel, but I'm just visiting. I actually live in America. I live in Colorado, and going to head back to Colorado in just a few days. And I'm here because I'm excited to share and think that it's important to share what I think is a relatively unique lens that I have as an Israeli who lives in the U.S. and is exposed to both narratives of, and it's not that I don't think that we have a shared narrative, but they're both kind of like viewpoints that American Jews have and that Israelis have. And I think that in this, around this trauma, we definitely see all of those opportunities that are, bringing us together, and the amazing response that American Jewry had right after October 7th and going on. But also we see some of the gaps and the tensions between us that grow, and those will be some of the things that I would love to touch upon today, and break down for us to understand a little bit better, and hopefully find the ways to accommodate each other in this very complex reality we're all living in.
No, thank you. Dina, Rabbi Dina Schaefer.
Justina is great. Thank you so much, Mark, and hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and engage in this really meaningful and important conversation. Obviously, just the incredible turnout for today is evidence in itself of the need for this conversation, and I'm really privileged to be a part of it. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement for the Community and Jewish Life Department at the Jewish Federations of North America, where I hold the Youth and Teen Education and Engagement portfolio. And I love this prompt around commemoration and what it means and why it's important. There's a beautiful teaching of the Besht, the Baal Shem Tov, who's the founder of Hasidic Judaism. And among his many, many prolific and profound bits of wisdom, he also says that forgetfulness leads to exile, while remembrance is the secret to redemption. And when I think of commemoration, this is something that surfaces for me. I believe that commemoration is sort of one of the ways we as Jews participate in renewal and express our commitment to the future. It's functionally, you know, an act of resistance. It's a gateway to creativity and revitalization, to add a couple more R's maybe to your list there, Mark. And it provides a really powerful and meaningful path to not only come together as a community, but to turn our grief into action. So I'm excited to explore that with everyone today.
So I love within even just the first 5 minutes, we've had one question and so many different multi-layered answers to the why are we here and the purpose of commemoration. We want to come away with understanding, well, how then do we commemorate? And Tikva, I want to position this to you. For our audience, I have a specific question or set of questions for each panelist, but I welcome everyone to follow up with their own thoughts. You know, we're no stranger to remembering events and tragic events in that in Jewish community, but there's something potentially very unique about 10/7/24. You know, it's not Tree of Life, it's not 9/11, Tree of Life synagogue shooting. Those are also horrific events, but as in our pre-conversations, we talked about, you know, 10/7 is different. Tell us, in your view, how you feel it's different or how we should think about it different. And then thus, how do we approach 10/7/24 and the commemorations, which coincide with Chaggim, with that in mind?
Yeah. Right. We talked about this, and I have to be transparent. I'm even more excited to hear from Noam, because I think he's going to even explain what we were talking about, which is the reason why 10/7 is different is because it is, right? I'm going to change that, a global event, right? So you're thinking about the people who've been impacted by 10/7, whether they were personally directly impacted because they were there, or even the people who happen to watch it on the news in whatever given country they were at that point in time. And the reason why I changed it from was to is because it's also still ongoing conflict. As I like to frequently talk about in trauma work, there is the trauma which then gets associated with, because not all trauma turns into PTSD. What we know is a lot of what causes or correlates to PTSD from a traumatic event is what happens before and after the traumatic event, and how one is comforted, what happened right before, what they're experiencing. We each have a different entry point. So, but in addition to that, what we also know is we all have different entry points, not only to the event, but how we receive that information. And so thinking about the people who you know were impacted, but even the people you might not know who were also impacted as well, and that it is still ongoing. So we're talking about treating trauma when we're still in it, which is right. You think about going to heal someone's wound, you're going to treat them differently if the wound has had a little scarring on its way towards healing versus if you still have a fresh, open, gushing wound. And so I think that's how it's different, because we're still living in it and we're still in it.
I really appreciate the fact that this is, unlike some of the other ones I just mentioned, global, and that this is, you know, 10/7 is ongoing. You know, a lot of people say that it's still October 8th for so many people, and even just news of tragic events over the last week, it feels like it's a continuing. It's not a was. Noam, I would love for you to share a little bit more, and also a little bit more of the how. How do we support Israelis living in our communities, youth in our communities? You work with this population with BBYO. What should we be thinking about in terms of the commemoration?
Yeah, of course. And Tikva, thank you so much for setting the ground really perfectly, I think, to breaking this down. The way I see it, the source of the trauma, the origin of the trauma is that for both American Jew and not only American Jews, so Jews around the world and Israeli Jews, October 7th brought existential crisis, but in different ways. In what way? For American Jews, or again, Jews around the world, they have seen kind of like a promo, right? Of like a little promo to what the world looks like without Israel.
Mm.
What happens when Israel is not there? And this is frightening. This is really, really scary. And I think that this this trauma continued when they had to go back to their communities, not necessarily their Jewish communities, but when we're talking about our teens, so back to their school, back to their to their clubs, to wherever they spend their time, and see that people don't get them and don't understand them, and even stand up against them, or against what they feel. So this is for people outside of Israel. People in Israel, the existential crisis was there as well. There are I would say that probably the biggest contract that Israelis have with their government, not a specific government, but with any Israeli government, is that Israel will be there for them when they really need it. And what happened on October 7th is that Israel wasn't there for them when they needed it. And this biggest contract that they were counting on, more than any possible other contract, was broken. And healing this break is going to be very, very difficult in the years to come. So I think the way I see it, this is the source of the trauma that leads us to this existential crisis that we're at today. And in terms of accommodating our different population. Listen, this is a really big question, and we can go on and on every population, right? On teens and Israelis and so on. But I'll say just a couple sentences on each. I think for teens, I think our teens are very confused because they have endless amount of information around them, and I think also because of our way of education that I also stand behind. This was the way that I educated. We kept telling them that that every approach to the conversation is possible and is okay and makes sense. But I think that our teens need a little bit more guidance. And this is one of the reasons why we see some voices within the Jewish community, especially within the US, that are questioning the ideas of Zionism and mixing it up with opposing to the Israeli government. And I think that that our teens are very confused and needs to have their feelings and their thoughts validated. It's okay to to think and feel different ways, but they also need some guidance of what are the boundaries of that conversation, right? So I think that this is what our teens need. They need this validation of their feeling and thoughts, but also some boundaries and some guidance. As for Israelis, I would say that that the gap between the mindset of Israelis and the mindset of Jews around the world, especially Jews in the US and North America, in a way grew because in America, we engage in conversations that are not even close to be aligned with the conversations in Israel, whether we like it or not. And sometimes we don't like it, and for a reason. But in America, very quickly, we jumped into conversations around peace and resolving the conflict, and maybe this is an opportunity. But Israelis are still living in October 7th. They're still there every day, every minute. Every family is affected. I can definitely share from my own experience. Every person lost people who are dear and beloved and close to them. And Israelis are very much so living in October 7th, and the trauma is present every day. As Tikva said, the war is still going on, the threat is still going on, and And I think that sometimes this can create a big gap between Jews in Israel and Jews in communities outside of Israel. And I think that we need to have compassion to each other. We both, I think, come from very good places and want this place to be a better place. And very easily we can think different things on each other because of the different ways we experience this.
I want to just take a moment and underscore that compassion. Having been in Israel just a couple of months ago for a couple of weeks, in part for a J response deployment, my experiences with Israelis on the ground was just appreciation that we were there, whether we were helping volunteer, being on a farm, or helping do the things that normally soldiers who are now in Gaza would do on their day jobs, but just being there and just demonstrating that we see them, whether they are in Israel or they're Israelis in North America, makes a huge difference. Just showing that compassion, Noam, I think that's really important. One more framing question, and I think then we're going to get into some details, both on youth and supporting Israelis and mental health. And I want to position this last framing question to Dina. This is coming in commemoration or in concert with the high holidays. Obviously, October 7th occurred on Simchat Torah. I believe October 7th is a little bit earlier this year, just after, I think it's in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. How do we balance the weight of 10/7 with the importance of the high holidays? Is there a balance that we need to be concerned about or attentive to? How do you see this, coinciding, actualizing itself, given the work that we want to do?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And I imagine one of the drivers for many of us who attended today, this has got to be, very front and center on our minds. And, just to name it up front, right, like this will probably be a question that we'll have to confront year after year after year after year. This will always happen in the fall, and the fall, we're both within the rhythm of the Jewish calendar, and also just in the rhythms of secular society, the academic calendar, where we sort of just find ourselves, is a really condensed, challenging, hyper stimulating time. So, we certainly experienced that on October 7th itself. I talked to many campus professionals, for example, who said, we just got through the launch of the school year and we made it through the high holidays. And now we are faced with this really difficult and horrific situation. So I imagine this year especially will be a tremendous opportunity for learning. And it's something we will have, that balance will be something we will probably continually calibrate every year moving forward. And it's a hard balance to strike, I think. I'll name also that the high holiday season, by and large, is a season of joy. And how do we balance sort of the confluence of emotions during this season is something those the folks in the Jewish professional space are going to have to contend with. And on that front, we do have some nice wisdom that I'm sure many of you have heard before from our sages, from the rabbis. There's a beautiful teaching in the Talmud, a story about a community where there is a funeral procession and a wedding procession happening simultaneously, coming from opposite ends of the road, and they meet in the middle. Right. And only the rabbis could conceive of this type of situation. Right. But what do? Who yields to the other? And ultimately, the rabbis decide that the funeral procession steps aside and gives way to the wedding procession. There's a whole bunch of conversation around this. And this is, maybe a controversial perspective in our contemporary mindset, specifically to this question. But we as a people have a tendency, and maybe even an encouragement, that we reroute grief, right? We don't postpone celebration. And that's not to say that there isn't a time and a place and a really important opportunity to commemorate. That's the whole reason that we're having this call, and it's beyond important that we acknowledge it and give it its due. I just want to sort of use that story to underscore the importance of balance here. During this season, we have the largest concentration of people in our places, however you translate that as per your community, than any other time in the year. And we are often trying to fit as much as possible into this season. And so yeah, just I don't have a great answer like, oh, 40% and 60%, obviously, right? Like, of course not. This is gonna vary, but it is like helpful to sort of remember that people are coming to us for lots of different reasons, and in seeking comfort for lots of different things, obviously, and importantly, including some context and reflection and meaningful commemoration around October 7th.
Dina, I actually think it was a wonderful answer, and I think you're making it clear that it's not about a percentage, but that joy is an important ingredient in the stew of how we're commemorating, honoring the holidays and commemorating 10/7 this year. That joy needs to be there for the resilience and the revitalization that we need, even as it's a solemn occasion. So let's have our apples and honey, even as we engage in the rituals that will have us continue to honor and help us navigate what will be, 365 days since October 7th. We are at day 300. It's actually a really great segue to ask a question. I'll gear it to Tikva, but open it to everyone. What are the best ways to allow people to grieve and have hope for the future?
As Rabbi Dina was talking, I was thinking about this concept of grief and how my expressive arts way, I think I would ask all of you to like close your eyes and envision when you hear the word grief, what it looks like, what shape it takes, what color is it, what texture, right? Because I hope I'm wrong. I think many of us would think of grief as like this dark, mucky, like, really cloud thing that may be hard to approach. But I think there's also another version of grief that also brings in this level of joy and brings in this level of warmth and welcoming, right? I think about our traditions around death and grieving, right? And the whole point of Shiva, of being able to tell stories, memories, right? Some of them, I hope, are joyous around this person that you're experiencing, that you have experienced throughout your life and have lost. There's this one person who is no longer with us, who holds a very special place in my heart and my community's heart, who was a Holocaust survivor. And it was always during Purim at the Suda, and he would stand up and he would say, "I'm here. We won because I'm here," right? And you think about what he had to do to survive to get there, and he lost his entire family. He lost everyone, and he witnessed that. But that grief was enveloped also by joy of being here in spite of. And I think there's a part of trauma, at least for me and my experience, around the healing process. I never quite use heal from, I say healing work or healing process, because I think it's a process that we all experience, like the spiral, where we get to make meaning. We each individually get to make meaning of what our experiences are in our life, given our entry point and given where we want to be. And that gets to exist in our own views, how Rabbi Dina was talking about, what else are we dealing with in our lives, or our own cultural layers, or our own experiences, and our relationships around us. So one of the things that I really encourage people is to dive deep into what meaning making is for them, right? And a lot of times when we think meaning making, sometimes I hope what comes to mind is expression, is creativity, is exploring it through your body, is storytelling. And I would say it's all of those things and more, right? That we get to define what that is for us, and we get to define that in the context of community and our own versions of trauma processing and healing work.
But that was really powerful. I'm only just going to share what I'm taking away from it so our audience can concretize it a little bit further. What I'm hearing is that, you know, this title is creating space, but it's not creating separate space. It's creating integrated space. 10/7 is now the story of, as Dina was saying, is going to be part of our fall story every time. So how do we create that integrative space that allows for meaning making, that allows for both joy and grief, which sounds like cousins, to shine through. Siblings, cousins, brothers, sisters. Hine Matov. Noam, I'll direct the next question to you, but again, for everyone, I'd love to hear, you know, you work, you know, at BYO with teens and their families too. What are the suggestions that are coming up for you what are the meaningful meaning-making programs that you would recommend to people in this audience? Maybe some on a small budget. I don't have a big resource to do something. What are the things that I can do in a small, financially maybe, but a very meaningful way to instill that joy, that meaning making, that time for grief and celebration as we approach this time?
Yeah, Mark, I'm actually going to circle back. You know, I'll answer your question by circling back to the question that Tikva just answered. No, I'm hearing two voices in Israel, and I think also from people outside of Israel that I think is important to recognize. I'm personally torn between them, and I don't know where I'm at, and it's kind of like, you know, this internal debate leads me with everything I do with BBYO programming. But I hear mainly two voices. You know, one voice is saying, you know, look at Israelis. You know, just in our trip just now with BBYO teens here in Israel, we were right by the American embassy the night the drone exploded in Tel Aviv. The drone really exploded literally on the you know, on the building that was just across the street from us, and I kept thinking the morning after we woke up, you know, we made sure we woke up obviously after, you know, in the middle of the night, running to the shelter, to the staircase with the teens, making sure everyone's right. But the morning after, we're waking up to Tel Aviv, hustling and bustling. People are in the, you know, the beaches are full, the bars in the Carmel market are full. And you know, we tried to pick up this like educational moment and say, look at Israelis. These people are, you know, their resilience is insane. It's unbelievable. And thanks to this resilience, you know, we are actually able to continue to move on, to have some kind of livable life in Israel, and being able also to fight Hamas in Gaza for 9 months, or fight in those 7 fronts that we're fighting in for so long. So this is one voice that I hear that I think is valid, and we have a lot to learn for. But the other voice that I hear is actually the opposite, is that it's impossible for us to be joyous, even not for a little bit, as long as we have you know, the hostages in the tunnels in Gaza, and as long as the war is still going on, as long as we see, you know, horrific days like this past weekend in Majd al-Shams, when 12 teenagers died in Hezbollah's rocket attack on a soccer field. So you know, this other voice that I hear is that we just can't be joyous. This is, you know, this would be lying to ourselves. And I'm sharing here in a very vulnerable and open way. I don't know where I'm at. I'm hearing those two voices. And I think this affects also our programming, right? So like when we bring people, do we focus in the trauma? Do we focus in healing, even though, as Tikva said, we're still in this? You know, for us, we're trying to, and this doesn't take any budget, but one of the things we try to do with our teens the most, that I think will give them a feeling of safety, is to give them the confidence to go out of the structures and the boxes that our society brings them in, right? You know, as we said before, our teens hear so many things. They're exposed to endless amount of information all the time. And we need to give them the confidence that they can have criticism on Israel. They can criticize the Israeli government. They can criticize the way that Israel conducts this war, but also that it's possible to do it while still having strong connections to Israel, and still mourning October 7th, still being able to commemorate October 7th. And I know that for some of us, it might sound it might sound obvious, but for a lot of our teens, it's not, right? They're sure that they're either here or there, right? That they're either, criticizing Israel and saying, I'm not even a Zionist at all, and I don't want to engage in BBYO programming, right? Or in programming that's connected to Israel. Or, if I'm for Israel or supportive of Israel, I have to support everything that Israel does and every Knesset member in Israel. And right, so my big mission is, connected to programming, and I bet that eventually it's gonna, bring our teens to a way better place, is to give them the confidence, give them the example that we can come out of those boxes, right? Like that they don't have to be either here or there. They can do those things together. They can have compassion for innocent people that die in Gaza, but at the same time know that it is essential to eliminate Hamas. You can be in that place, but a lot of people don't know it. And this is one of the things that in our educational approach at BBYO, we're trying to do, to kind of like help our teens go out of those boxes.
Mark, can I say something real quick to Noam?
Yeah.
In therapy, we call that the both and experience. It's not either or, it's both and.
I would add something quickly to that. Also, first of all, Noam's so beautifully articulated and tracks like so perfectly with everything that we've seen on the ground. And that like appreciation of nuance is actually a developmental skill that is essential to help these young people enter into the world in which they live. And if we kind of adjust some of our pedagogy around that principle, the way you just so beautifully described, we can go to beautiful places with them.
I just want to echo that maybe this is the year of maybe many more years of the both and Chaggim, and that we want to allow people to experience joy or not experience joy if that's not something that they're aiming to experience right now, true to what Noam just said, and to live in the complexity. I want to invite people who are watching. We have hundreds of people on this webinar right now, either through Q&A or the chat. Beth is sharing through the chat. Please share your questions. I'll try to get to a couple of them. So while you do that, I want to ask a question. I'll start with Dina, but Tikva, Noam, of course. We've talked a lot about the teen and the young people space, especially interested in thinking about just broader commemorations for synagogue and community at large, both integrated with a Chaggim and not. What can people start thinking about? I will add, there'll be resources in the event webpage, including resources from JCC Association, Israel Engagement, and ideas relative to this. But for the conversation as well, what can people start thinking about doing or continue to think about doing as we come up to this 1 year?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one that I think again is pretty broad. So here's a relatively broad answer, I suppose. But I think some of the opportunity that lies in this space of congregational work, communal work, to really center partnership and to model collaboration, and to demonstrate the importance of relationship building during times of tension and strife and challenge and hardship, is one thing that congregations in particular, but also communal organizations may really want to elevate in this time. I know it's not always possible, but in terms of the opportunity for optics and the chance to really deliver a message of hope that often accompanies commemoration, when we can come together with people that we may not typically come together with, it's a really nice way to bring that message home.
I think collaboration, partnership, and relationship building is right on. JFNA just released the surge of people really engaging in Jewish life since October 7th in North America. And people will be coming into our doors online and in person. How do we, leverage that situation? during this solemn time, that's also one that could be full of hope. I think those are good ingredients we should all think about. Noam and Tikva, additional thoughts to ways people on this call could be thinking about creating experiences for their synagogues, their communities, as during the Chaggim and October 7th specifically.
I saw Rabbi Dina. You just came off mute. Is there something you want to add?
I was just gonna add quickly that like often when we sort of like picture those moments, right, they're ceremonial, they're very frontal. And so the only other thing I would add that is worth considering is that that's not the only modality in which to engage in these types of meaningful opportunities. And just throw out there that creating moments for self-expression or meaningful conversation, leaning into the arts, leaning into sort of like other mediums that we may not always consider, right? Not every collaborative opportunity has to be ceremonial with speakers and, big names to make an impact. So that's all. Tikva, back to you. Sorry.
No, Bert, thank you. Thank you. Because that was like a perfect like carpet, right? So thank you. No, exactly that. And I think, and with the trauma lens, right? We were talking earlier about how like when we experience trauma, it's usually not just through words. It's usually some type of physical act that has occurred. Not all the time, but usually what we're talking about, intense trauma, right? And so I think that is such something to keep in our minds about. It's not just like getting at our minds, it's about a full body experience. So I think any way we can incorporate that in an organic way is helpful to our system. But something that we haven't touched on too, you said self-expression, that I definitely wanted to name before the call was over, it is for sure like oxygen mask time. Right? The plane is we're still flying, right? We are still flying, as Noam so beautifully spoke towards resilience, but there is for sure some turbulence and the oxygen masks are down. And so, and engaging with others, engaging with new people, right? Bringing in different partnerships. It is so vital that you also take care of yourself and that you also think about, what is it that I need to be resilient? What is it that I need to get through? What am I exploring? What questions are coming up for me that I haven't yet answered, as that was even modeled in this call, right? So that way you at least have a good sense of your own entry level when engaging with others and what you need to take care of yourself to be resilient to get through those moments. And then offer those tools to the people that we help on a regular basis.
Mm. So Tikva, yeah, you were in my head because that was the question I was going to ask everyone, is maybe a penultimate question, if not an ultimate question. What do we need as, if you're on this call as a staff member or someone that is contributing to supporting Jewish community? And let me just honor that you might have some compassion fatigue. It's been 300 days since October 7th. That was on the heels of COVID. That was on the heels of rising anti-Semitism, Tree of Life Synagogue shooting going back 5 years, there's so many things that we're just holding that it weighs on us. And now we're going into another season where it's going to weigh on us. I would offer, how are each of you taking care of yourselves? And how would you recommend folks on this call take care of themselves so they can be in best position to serve their communities?
Yeah. So that's, I think for me, I'll make it personal. For me, I wake up asking myself every day, what do I need today? And that changes on the day. It changes on who I'm encountering, what I'm doing, what my kids need, what my family community needs. Today it was putty during this call, right? And some water and my aromatherapy going on in the back. I do engage in different learning opportunities, and prayer is helpful in community, but it's truly checking in every day and figuring out what is it that I need to get through the day, and trying my best to get that to myself while I'm also thinking about others around.
Noah?
I'll share that I know that this option won't be available for everyone, but there are enough opportunities for many people to do so. And I found, even though it might sound crazy for many people, that for so many people I heard from that came back from Israel, they didn't have a more healing experience than going to Israel and experiencing this crazy historical time here in Israel with our brothers and sisters right here. And I think that this coming high holidays, it's an opportunity for us to say that this is the time not only to be there for Israel and in the metaphoric way, but really to go to Israel in whatever opportunities we have. Again, we know that things are changing. The Middle East is as dynamic and changing and crazy than ever. But whenever the opportunities come, not only for Israel and for Israelis to see, which is huge, but also for ourselves, every person that I met with that came back from Israel with all the difficulty, with all the things that we hear and see in the testimonies and so on, this has been a very healing experience for them. So I highly encourage all of us to bring into the conversation this coming high holidays that this is the time to go to Israel more than ever.
Tina?
Yeah, I was gonna, I'll piggyback on that. And I was gonna, from the personal self-care perspective, I was gonna say the same thing. I also just returned and found it to be a really cathartic and helpful. And just even to hug my friends there and, be in close physical proximity was really powerful and meaningful. I would also suggest, and I don't know, Tikva is the resident social worker on this call, or those of you in this space who, you may feel free to push back and tell me this is an antiquated phrase and we don't say this anymore. And that's not the hat that I wear, but the idea of sort of what they used to say, the name it to tame it principle. Okay, I'm getting a nod. Awesome. I think especially if you're a congregational or organizational leader, kind of leaning into that with your staff a little bit, like starting now and saying repeatedly and publicly in front of your team and at every staff meeting, right, that this is going to be a really difficult season. And not only are you balancing, all the things that we would normally be balancing at this time of year, but adding in this really important moment in time and acknowledging it through programming and other means as well. And just kind of reminding people, I know it sounds simple and it may, not seem like a whole lot, but I think people often feel, especially, our colleagues and Jewish professionals feel that they're not entitled to feel that sense of overwhelm, especially when it comes to these really important moments, and in particular during this season on the calendar, right? I remember I served a pulpit for many years, and I remember often feeling, or in some ways being told, maybe not explicitly, but like, this is what you signed up for. And of course it's busy, that like, this is always an intense time, and it is one of the most meaningful times on the Jewish calendar, again, because we have such a concentration of people who are leaning in, and you often feel like, oh, you have this like one shot, to get it right in front of everyone. And I think just like constantly naming that to tame it, not to validate that you only have one shot. We know that's not the case, but reminding people that this is going to be tough, and I'm here for you, and we're here for each other, and our team is really excellent, and we look out for one another. And yeah, it's really tough. And how are you doing? And yeah, this is a really difficult time. And how are you balancing that right now? So just a simple thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna answer the question too. I want to acknowledge some of the questions that have come into the chat. We are almost at time, so we may not have a chance to address them. I'm just gonna add, within JCC J response, we often say, if you need to do anything, just JCC. Just do that one thing. Just breathe. Just go for that walk. If you're having a difficult moment, just do that one thing that will ease a little bit. C, communicate in community, that none of us are alone in this endeavor. We're maybe in different boats, but we're all in the same ocean. So how can we lean on each other? And constructive habits. We often find when we're in positions of trauma, post-trauma, that we give ourselves this permission not to do the things that actually make us feel better, the putty in our hands, or the morning walk, or reading that book, or not looking at social media. I would encourage us to lean into those constructive habits even when we feel like we shouldn't, which actually is one of the questions. We won't have time for them, but I want to honor that we have 2 more conversations that Be Well and Blue Dove are hosting on the 20th and 27th to further this conversation. There were some questions about how do we deal with all the hateful comments that we're seeing on social media and anti-Semitism? It is not a complete answer, but how do we not always have that in front of our faces? And to separate ourselves from them may help a little bit. There's questions about security, and how do we balance security with coalition building and still being, you know, places of welcoming and opening to all people. So I encourage us to continue having these conversations. Each of them deserve much longer than a 2-second answer. I want to express incredible gratitude to Tikva, to Noam, and to Dina. Thank you for being on this call. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you to the hundreds that are on this call that I hope you found meaningful reflection, both at an abstract level and a concrete level, as you plan for yourself and for the communities that you support and lead, how to address this, you know, very unique and what sadly won't be a unique from year after year, Chaggim, in concert with commemorating 10/7. So on behalf of this entire panel, I give it back to our friends at Be Well and Blue Dove for some closing experiences.
Thank you so much. And to echo Mark, I am so incredibly grateful for all of you for sharing your voices with us. We want to just wrap up in our last couple of moments, really leaning into this idea of compassion or self-compassion, which in some way, shape, or form, all of you on the panel spoke about today. You know, what does that compassion look like and feel like for us? How do we take the moment to just breathe? How do we have compassion for each other, but also for ourselves? I'm going to share my screen. And thinking of both the words of Rabbi Hillel, right? If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? But also connecting to, it was recently in a continuing education course, for those of you who are licensed in anything, you know the beauty of taking those. But it was focused around secondary traumatic stress, the distressing experience of witnessing the trauma of others, which is something that those of us in helping professions have absolutely experienced within the past year. Many of us on this call or watching this recording have experienced that. And your compassion, if it does not include yourself, it is not complete. Mark said that this perhaps is the year of both and, right? What does that look like for us to be compassionate towards others in our community and compassionate towards ourselves? So on our resource page that we will be putting in the chat, as well as sending out in our follow-up email, we'll have a really beautiful handout called the ABCs of Coping, which is adapted from Dr. Brandy Nicole Brooks's The Complete Compassion Workshop. But thinking about what are the different parts, what are the different components that you need to address difficult moments as they arise this holiday season? How can you think about these ahead of time so that you are aware of what you need, you have a sense of what your balance might look like, and you have connection to people around you? That connection is so paramount. So as I mentioned, we will be sharing out the resource page and the recording. There will be links to register for the continued conversation sessions so that you can brainstorm and talk with your peers more in detail about these specific questions that you have. I want to say a huge thank you to our panel, to our speakers and moderator, and to the teams at the Blue Dove Foundation and to Be Well for all of the support in making this happen. And I want to end today with a really beautiful closing prayer that was created in one of the Blue Dove Foundation's workshops where we examine the Misha Berach as a prayer, and then in small groups write our own prayers for healing. This was actually written by a group at the JCC Association of North America, and this is a Misha Berach for those struggling with isolation. And so this is a blessing that we would like to share with you all today. May you understand that you are not alone. May you surround yourself with love and light. May you find peace and comfort each day, even in a small way. May you cultivate connection however you can. May you feel the love of those who care most. May you remember that this state is only temporary and that your feelings are valid each day. And may you believe in yourself and persevere during this time. And together we say amen. Thank you again
Amen.
to all of our speakers, to our team, and to all of you for sharing your time with us today. We are so grateful.
Thank you so much.